David, it's Friday, so that means we're ready for some reverse engineered crime scene investigations. I think people have come to really appreciate your extremely unique style of identifying the technological signature of a particular crime scene and then instructing us as to patented technologies that could achieve such a unique signature. My guest for some of the new subscribers, of course, is David Hawkins, one of the co-founders of Able Danger. David, I know yesterday was just Thursday in Canada, but happy Thanksgiving to you. How are you today?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I believe the president customarily pardons a turkey, so that's one happy turkey in America, right?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed that he's spending his time pardoning turkeys rather than incarcerating the Clintons, but, you know, we take what we can get.
That's a very quotable comment.
You know, David, there's talk in the news. The Republicans have demanded a hearing, and it looks like Mrs. Clinton is going to have to answer some more questions about her personal server and some of the emails that she's sent. I know we're not going to get into this too much in our conversation today, but it really is stunning to me that people think that's not a big deal, that the Secretary of State of the United States would use a personal email address, a personal email domain, and a personal email server to contain all of her electronic communications as she's the Secretary of State, and then destroy that when subpoenaed by Congress. It's so egregious, it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, and it just shows how desensitized the American people, and I suppose many people around the world, to this basically repeated felony, because after a while when nothing happens, I suppose it becomes the new normal.
Yeah, that's right. So hopefully we will see some justice. I think we should also mention to our viewers here, David, that this, of course, is the precursor to our regular show, reverse engineered crime scene investigations with David Hawkins. And of course, that is available to our generous Patreon sponsors. I always like to remind everyone that in addition to watching on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, people really should go over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That, of course, is David's exclusive Patreon page, and that's the only location you can find David on Patreon. It's very important that David has our financial support. And of course, David has content on his Patreon page beyond just the videos that he and I do every Friday. He's regularly doing posts. I've got a little bit of a slow load here on Patreon, but people can find David there at patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. So David, why don't you take us through what you've come upon today? We're going to be talking, of course, about Al Gore. We're going to be talking about Air France Flight 447, which suffered an untimely demise in, what was it, 2007?
2009.
2009, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So just a few words about Al Gore, probably one of the greatest flim-flam artists of all time. He's managed to sway the American people, counter to the basic principles of physics and science, that a trace gas, some people, including myself, would describe it as a wholly beneficial, transparent, odorless trace gas, which serves a fundamental role as a fertilizer in the carbon-oxygen-hydrogen cycle, is a pollutant. And really, when you think about it, that's quite a success to be able to fool. Isn't there a phrase in America, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time? I think that's my crucible or crux or hope, that Al Gore can't fool everyone. He hasn't fooled me. If you ask most people how much anthropogenic carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere in terms of percentage, and you say to them, do they think it's more than 2%? And I've tried this actually in a room of about 100 people when I was running for office in British Columbia. Almost everyone raised their hands, right? because 2% sounds quite small, right? If you say to the audience, do you think anthropogenic, that's man-made carbon dioxide, is greater than 0.2%, everyone raises their hands unless they know the real answer. 0.02 you can go to. Do you know, Jason, it's 19 parts per million. It's almost so low you can't measure it.
Wow.
And this clown Al Gore says it's the main driver of anthropogenic global warming. Catastrophic is self-explanatory. Anthropogenic means human, man-made, and global warming, means global warming. And then, of course, these clowns relate it to the fires in California, et cetera, et cetera. So we're talking about an extraordinary illusion or myth that's been perpetrated on a long-suffering humanity by these clowns. And, of course, they make a quick buck out of it. Anyway, fast forward to Air France 447. Al Gore, of course, was the vice president of the United States who claims to have invented the internet. I probably have a better claim to inventing the internet than he does, but I'll come to that a bit later. So take a flight like 447. I think it had 228 passengers and crew on board. And of course, I don't know if you know, do you happen to know what percentage or parts per million of carbon dioxide you take in as a human being, Jason?
Definitely don't know.
Okay, well, it's about 380 to 390 parts per million, which is what's in the atmosphere. That's total carbon dioxide, not just man-made. You breathe out 40,000 parts per million. That's the nature of what goes on in your body, and the exchange is taking place in your lungs.
Right.
So you, Jason Goodman, from Al Gore's point of view, would be violating his basic principle that you should only be allowed, let's say, 350 parts per million to exist on the planet, and you're violating it at 40,000. So interestingly, and I'm not saying Al Gore wants to kill you, but what I am saying is his algorithms have been programmed to kill you. Not just you, Jason Goodman, it's not specifically, but certainly on an aircraft like that plane, the Air France 447, which was actually an Airbus A330. It's got 228 passengers and crew on board, all spewing out carbon dioxide, which is just a natural phenomena of humanity. So now, when you kill all of those people, right, and you take their expected life duration, right, you actually save, in their terms, a lot of carbon dioxide by weight, probably several tons over their lifetime. Now, what about an aircraft? You can actually Google how much carbon dioxide these aircraft produce per mile. And I don't know how long that A330 was being expected to be in existence, but let's say 30 years. I mean, it's a well-made plane. So when it leaves Rio de Janeiro for its flight to Paris on that day, June the 1st, 2009, it represents a huge burden on the Earth's environment because of this catastrophic anthropogenic global warming scam. So Al Gore and his cronies have a duty to blow it up. Now, that might seem,
you have a wonderful way of putting things, David. It's fascinating, of course, and we've long heard this debate of global warming, and I mean, I personally have thought, is it a matter of semantics? I mean, clearly humans are burning things and making chemical combinations that might not naturally occur. Aren't we polluting the environment and doing danger? I mean, if you turn on your automobile and close the garage door, the garage door, and stay inside and breathe all that, you'll die fairly quickly. So why is it not true that running all these cars and airplanes within the atmosphere is doing some kind of damage to us?
Well, that's why I think, and someone has been banging on at me to rename my profession, if that's the right term, from forensic economics to forensic engineering.
Right.
If you gave the problem to an engineer like myself way back when I started my career, that you wanted to clean up what's coming out of the exhaust of a car or a factory, I would say as an engineer, well, what elements do you want to look at? Is it particulates? Is it dust? Is it sulfur dioxide? Is it sulfur monoxide? Is it carbon monoxide? I wouldn't even mention carbon dioxide because it's a wholly beneficial, transparent, odorless fertilizer gas, and you
Just
need it in
plant
the
more
atmosphere.
trees, right?
Plant more trees, right? And but don't stop human beings breathing out and by killing them because it's ludicrous. So anyway, so now coming back to your question, carbon dioxide is a friendly gas. It's the God-given gas. And when I say to the greenies, do you really want to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? And they nod wisely or sycophantly or whatever you like to call it. But I say, all right, well, you better change your name to the Brown Party because the plants are going to die. But that doesn't have the same cachet, right?
No, definitely not. Green sounds better than brown. And David, I'm sorry to interrupt with a non sequitur comment, but a little bit of sort of technical housekeeping. I should mention that this is one of the first broadcasts to use a new piece of software that I've got here that allows me to unify the chat comments from both Crowdsource the Truth YouTube channels, the Periscope channel, the Twitch channel, vk.com, which is our Russian social media channel, and I don't know if I mentioned Periscope, but we've got quite a bit of chat comments here, so we can communicate with the users. We've got someone named Omega Man who says CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and he says that you're ignorant, David.
Oh, well, thank you. What was his name?
Omega Man.
Oh, well, hi, Omega Man. Thank you very much for that support, right? Really encouraging, but I'm fairly thick-skinned because I might point out that a greenhouse gas, I do believe that actually carbon dioxide is injected into greenhouses to build up to about 2,000 parts per million because it's a fertilizer gas. And actually, if you look over geochronological time, back to the Cretaceous and so on, there's been a couple of periods, I think now and way back in the Cretaceous, when there's been a minimum global temperature and a minimum carbon dioxide together. Most of the time, there's zero correlation at all from a geochronological point of view. Now, what that means is back in the Cretaceous, I think the Earth's atmosphere contained about 7,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide with no associated correlation with global temperature. Now, where there is correlation, and of course, the issue here, Jason, is we'll get questions like the ignorant comment from Mr. Omega 2 or whatever his name is. But we have to be careful not to divert from the main subject.
Right.
But I suggest that Omega 2 looks at the correlation associated with the precession of the equinoxes between temperature and carbon dioxide, and he'll notice that every 100,000 years is a peak in temperature and a peak in carbon dioxide. His problem will be that the peak in temperature precedes the peak in carbon dioxide because carbon dioxide is coming out of solution in the water of the oceans, in the top 1 foot of oceans. But back to Air France 447.
Yes.
So Air France 447 left Brazilian Atlantic radar surveillance at 0149 UTC, University Time Coordinates, on the 1st of June 2009. And then, Jason, it flies into what is known as a communication dead zone, which is a wonderful opportunity for someone like Al Gore and his cronies, including this extraordinary woman, Joanne Isham, who's been X years with the CIA and is now a director of Maxar, which does global surveillance through satellites, and has also absorbed this company, McDonnell Detweiler and Associates. And I sent you a link to McDonnell Detweiler and Associates press release of May the 3rd of 2001, where they introduced this concept. They didn't invent it, and I'll claim if Al Gore can claim he invented the internet, I'm going to claim that I invented the drag and drop interface, but I'll come back to that in a minute. What McDonnell Detweiler says in their press release of May the 3rd of 2001, they have received a contract from the United States Air Force for instrument approach procedure technology that would allow you to take a plane and I'm not getting the words exactly right, but it doesn't matter, off its regular en route airway and take it through what they don't say is these are ad hoc waypoints to avoid towers and other kinds of intersections. And this is probably going to be installed by the United States Air Force at 108 Air Force bases around the world. And it operates through a drag and drop user interface.
Now, David,
So
I'm
if you
sorry.
take that,
I
go ahead.
think I missed that press release. Where was that?
Well, I sent it to you by email,
Okay.
just as an excerpt, I think about a half an hour ago,
Okay.
right? So, so May the 3rd, 2001,
Yes, I see it.
McDonnell Detweiler says, we can help the United States Air Force take a plane off its regular en route airway, fly through various maneuvers to avoid towers and intersections into the flight envelope, and we can apply that through a drag and drop user interface. So what they're really saying is we can hijack an aircraft, or we can re-hijack an aircraft. So if during an exercise, like Amalgam Virgo of 911 or not Amalgam Virgo the 1st and 2nd of June, you're putting on an exercise where you're trying to help the United States Air Force recapture a plane that has been hijacked by this Al-Qaeda group, you can actually hijack it yourself and land it. And it all depends on who's in the cockpit and who's in the virtual control room. Now, fast forward to Air France 447, 1st of June 2009. The moment you take a plane out of reach of the regular communications, the civilian communications and the civilian radar, and incidentally, our company, Serco, is the largest non-government air traffic controller in the world. So always we should be asking its opinion, or the directors of Serco's opinion, on how come these planes sort of disappear in areas where there's very poor communications from a civilian point of view.
How many times has that
What I
occurred,
think
David?
Where a plane goes sort of outside the reach of civilian communications?
And then crashes.
Well, I suppose 9/11. What quality of communications do we have with air traffic controllers on 911? But we do have these planes flying for up to an hour and completely being missed by the United States Air Force.
It's quite
It
strange,
seems to
though.
me
Weren't they flying over the mainland United States on 9/11? Why would we lose communication with them?
Because you're in the middle of an exercise, right? And you've handed over the skies to Canada and the technology of McDonnell Detweiler because the exercise is intended to test whether or not the United States Air Force can prevent a hijacking. Unknown to the people inside the United States Air Force, I think you can throw a switch on the Federal Bridge. You remember the invention of the interactive training system for AWACS weapons directors?
Yes.
What that means is that there are AWACS weapons directors. There we are. You put it up on the schematic. You've got this facility over on the right-hand side with Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, the Boeing company, and Northrop Grumman. And you see as you go around that arc at the top is EADS, right, above Castilian.
Yes.
EADS is the manufacturer of Airbus.
Really?
Right? So what that means is on the Federal Bridge, connected to, I think somewhere else there's the DOS, the Department of State, where Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and feeding all of the top secret information that would have been flying around between her and the insiders of the Department of State. She was putting, I allege, out on the Federal Bridge. So everyone who was interested would know what Hillary Clinton was thinking about, I don't know, the future for the gyro chip that she brokered the development of, for which Boeing paid a $15 million fine for the export by Boeing of the gyro chip to China.
Wow.
So what I'm basically saying is you can, through the Federal Bridge and companies like McDonnell Detweiler and corrupt individuals in the Department of State, capture any aircraft, including the Airbus A330 of Air France Flight 447, and fly it into a stall position. Now, I think they were monitoring the cockpit of the Flight 447 because the most experienced pilot, he'd gone into the rest bay for a sleep, because over the Atlantic, it's just routine flying, primarily on autopilot through waypoints pre-selected on departure.
Right.
But what you can do with McDonnell Detweiler and the ad hoc drag and drop, you can impute waypoints, elevation, and geographical coordinates into the aircraft, and it will fly into those imputed or ad hoc waypoints. And what they did, I'm alleging, is to save a lot of carbon, because they were intending to crash the plane and kill everyone on board. They were going to save an awful lot of carbon, and the weight of carbon saved was being bet upon through these death pool betting operations set up probably in Vancouver from the 1996 period. So I believe the victims... Go ahead.
Why do you think Vancouver in 1996?
Well, let's go back to what happened in 1996. There was a meeting in the Great Hall of Justice to provide Gore Hammer Awards to the inventors or developers of 3 systems for, quote, the reinvention of government. I bet most Americans didn't know that on the 22nd of October of 1996, 2 months before little John Benet Ramsey is garroted and tasered and sodomized and skull is fractured around, that their government was being reinvented. And back up here in Vancouver, I arrived actually in BC in 92, and I smelt corruption on a scale that I'd never seen before, but that's by the by. 2 projects were launched, projects probably being the wrong word. A federally registered society called Piggy Palace Good Time Society, registered by the federal government to hold sporting and entertainment events out at the Picton family pig farm, where on a Friday night, up to 2,000 guests would watch a prostitute being tortured to death. Down in Vancouver at 425 Carroll Street, which is the headquarters office of an outfit called StarNet Communication Systems.
Right.
They were embarking on a new business model that involved the transmission or trade in child and hardcore pornography and online gaming. So I've made an inference that the online gaming, actually, they were engaged in dead pool betting. Right? So you basically have 2 corrupt organizations, StarNet Communications International, in a state-of-the-art building or office at 425 Carroll Street, right by the downtown east side from where the prostitutes were disappearing. And you have a pig farm that launched into socially registered and worthy entertainment and sporting events, where up to 2,000 guests could be flown in from around North America and watch a woman being shot by a biological bullet and place bets on how long it would take her to die. I mean, these are crimes almost beyond most people's comprehension, but I think they're very important to understand that they operate not because there's a particular individual with a particular evil mind, but because people like Al Gore and his sycophants have decided that one way of managing society is through expert system, artificial intelligence, or fuzzy logic algorithms. Interesting, there's a word that's very close, Al Gore and algorithms. For me, they go hand in hand.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that. Of course, we're frequently looking at this Jerome Lemelson patent, and I do enjoy the repetition of these topics because it's often difficult for people to, first of all, understand, and secondarily, to believe. But it does make sense, and these are patents that talk about these expert systems. And again, when you talk about the mens rea, the evil mind, A computer has no morality, so it's not a question of evil. It's just a question of a calculation. It causes one to think about, the artificial intelligence depicted in 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's film, where the computer, HAL, receives conflicting information and chooses to kill the crew of the plane. So I guess it's a similar kind of thing, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where we've discussed this before, and I feel this is vitally important for people to understand that if you have programmed a computerized entity or a virtual or physical war room with artificial intelligence expert system or fuzzy logic algorithms, there's nothing personal involved in knocking a plane with 229 passengers out of the sky on the basis that you're saving a weight of carbon dioxide, and therefore you're contributing to the reduction of risk associated with catastrophic anthropogenic global warming. From a philosophical point of view, it's based on a falsehood, because there is no catastrophic anthropogenic global warming. It's not possible for humans, like you can fly over Canada at night, for example, and you can fly for hours and hours looking down and you'll barely see a light. Okay, you come to Vancouver and there's lots of lights and so on, but the impact of humanity on the Earth's climate is negligible, to be the point of immeasurably small. Again, you program algorithms at your peril, because now we've got a system where the global air transport industry, I believe, they're now in a position over the Federal Bridge to monitor the rate of carbon dioxide being produced on any aircraft anywhere in the world. So my model of, I don't know how, Space Odyssey 2001 is that they're looking with these algorithms at which plane, with what kind of load of passengers and expectation of life, would most justify the algorithm instructing other parts of the Federal Bridge to take that plane out in an area where there is dead communications, and it's extremely difficult to do a classical crime scene investigation.
So do I understand correctly, David, that you're saying that based on algorithms and artificial intelligence access to this Federal Bridge, a computer is just deciding, hey, it's time to crash this plane?
Yes.
Wow.
And of course, the manner by which it's crashed is very interesting, because most cases of these, since 911, there is no Mayday call issued by the pilot, because the communications with the plane have been taken over by the computer. So the computer cannot issue, the pilot cannot issue a Mayday alert and have people looking at him or eyeballing the plane which he's in to see if it's going through a maneuver consistent with an inexperienced pilot. So you remember that angle of attack problem that hit the Boeing off the coast of Indonesia?
Yes.
It was exactly the same with Air France Flight 447. The plane was put through an angle of attack, so to speak. It went into a stall position from which the pilot, when he came back from the rest, the senior pilot, and the two co-pilots were unable to recover.
Right? Now, David, so for people who might not be people who might not be familiar with the aviation terminology, the angle of attack has to do with the orientation of the wing and the amount of lift that's able to be generated. Is that right?
It's the pitch, as I understand it, of an aircraft, that when it's coming into land, and remember, the McDonnell-Detweiler boasts that with a drag and drop interface, you could take a plane off its regular en route airway, fly it through instrument approach procedures, and it does say in that press release from McDonnell-Detweiler, into the final approach procedures, which is run out of a company in Ottawa. I think it's called Aviation Data Management, into a Category 3C landing. So the entire process can be taken over by the computer, and it will compensate for gusts, shear winds, elevation, temperature, etc. However, if the computer's been programmed to induce or impute a crash, you merely insert ad hoc waypoints, change the angle of attack, put the plane into a position where the pilot is actually making the wrong decisions because suddenly they're being presented with something that they were never taught during the simulation.
Wow. Now, David, I want to take a moment to remind everyone that this is a preview to the show that will be beginning at 2 p.m., and we've got just a few more minutes here. Definitely want to encourage people to go over to Patreon, where they can watch the rest of the program that's going to be starting at 2. They could do that at patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards or at patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. You're going to get access to a lot of exclusive programs there, and of course your financial support is critical to continuing the show. I couldn't do this show without David, and David has lots of material on his Patreon page, so I hope that people who are sponsoring Crowdsource the Truth on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth will also become sponsors of David at patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. So, okay, David, computers deciding that for whatever calculated reason, it makes more sense to kill people, and this particular plane that's traveling from Rio de Janeiro to Paris is the one that's selected, and it finds the most efficient way to destroy it. Is this just a massive, I guess, software? It's not even a glitch, really. It's sort of an unintended consequence, or how would you describe it?
No, by no means. I think it's an intended consequence. Is the moment you take a scientific myth and program computers to operate on the basis that that is true, whether it's an unintended consequence, of course, the programs are trying to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions of human beings.
So it's an inconvenient truth, you would say.
It's an inconvenient lie for Al Gore, because eventually we're going to catch up with him, and he's going to pay a price which may put him on death row. But maybe I'm exaggerating. What I'd like people to understand is, when Al Gore went to work as a director of Apple, by the time he joined Apple, he had been familiar with how to reduce carbon dioxide through algorithmic techniques. One of those techniques, invented by Apple, and I'll give it its full name, was graphical user interface, providing consistent behavior for the dragging and dropping of content objects, such as aircraft. Priority date 1995-08-07. So I'm making the allegation that it would appear, and you talked earlier about how you match the signature of a crime with the technology or the patents that fit it. I believe the drag and drop interface is absolutely fundamental to understanding why these aircraft are crashing in the way that they do, because the drag and drop interface allows someone who's not an expert in aviation to select the plane to be crashed and select the target to be crashed, or the target zone or the crime site. So, for example, if you take MH Flight 17, they needed to drop MH Flight 17 in contested territory in the Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, at a town near Donetsk, where they knew that the people who arrive at the crime scene could be a party to the destruction or spoliation of evidence as to what caused it. Over to you.
So are you saying that Apple Computer had something to do with the crash of Air France 447?
What I'm saying is that the patent taken out by Apple had something to do with the crash. Now, this comes back to the question, when a patent is granted to Apple, like for the drag and drop interface, what I believe has happened is that people like Nicholas Soames, the former UK Minister of Defence, and this woman Tracy McVicar, who was supposed to collect a computer from the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11, are given ad hoc custody. I've changed it. It's not a kind of a de facto custody. It's ad hoc custody. So as I mentioned before the show, it's possible with any plane that's been so modified to decide after takeoff, I'm going to take that one out. And do you know the individual who would have most experience at ad hoc hijacking of aircraft? It has to be Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, who created Conair in 1984 and has decades of experience in booking people onto Conair aircraft and wiring, if you will, or arranging for the Conair aircraft to survive a prisoner mutiny, which is what she called her brother about in December of 1988, just before Pan Am 103 was blown up over Lockerbie in Scotland. Over to you.
That Pan Am 103 flight has come into conversation recently. I was speaking with the Moriartys, who spent some time in Libya, and they have told me that basically everything that we've heard about Libya is untrue. So that's quite interesting. We've got just a few minutes left here, David, on our preview show before people can head over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards or patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. Christine Marcy, of course, is a frequent subject of these conversations. She is Field McConnell's sister, and Field has described her as, I think, the second most evil woman in the world.
Well, I would put her right at the top, actually, simply because of her access to such things as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database, the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund,
Right.
the founder of the Senior Executive Service, and the founder of JPATS, or Justice Prisoner Alien Transportation System. She seems to me the only woman with all of the networks in place to execute crimes like 911, or for that matter, the crash of Air France 447 in the Atlantic in a communications dead zone. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, all right, David, why don't we wrap up this session and we'll carry on Patreon. People can join us over there by going to Patreon right now, and we'll begin at 2 p.m. Eastern. People can watch on either patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, that's David's Patreon page, or they can watch on patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll be back in just a little bit.
Thank you, Jason.